Fantastic. What can I say? Welcome. It is absolutely great to have you here on the stage with us, Your Excellency, Dr. Gibril Ibrahim. Like Richard, I've just come from the ground as well. I was in Ukraine, a conflict that is getting so much attention, and rightfully so. It is a devastating conflict. But a few months ago, I was in Sudan, and in contrast, it is a conflict that's getting very little attention, even though it's equally devastating. I mean, the humanitarian situation there is dire, just the destruction. I went to Chad, where I met thousands of Sudanese who can't go back home because of what's happening there. Can you give us an update of what's happening on the ground?
Thank you very much. In terms of magnitude and figures, the Sudan's crisis is the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world right now. Over 12 million people has been displaced forcefully within the country, and over 2 million people has been displaced, forced to take refuge in neighboring countries. So the situation, as you correctly said, is really there. But unfortunately, this is a forgotten war and a forgotten crisis. Few will pay some attention to it. Luckily, possibly because, well, there are other wars, like the one in Gaza and the one in Ukraine, that overshadowed the whole thing and what's going in Sudan. The humanitarian crisis is serious. The UN Security Council made a resolution 2736 long time ago, asking the RSF to lift the siege on Al-Fashir. But unfortunately, that siege continues. And nobody actually bothered to follow up with the resolution. So people are starving now in Darfur, in Al-Fashir in particular, and the RSF is not allowing access for UN agencies to reach the people there. That's one of the biggest crises. Now there's influx of refugees as well as IDPs to return to the liberated areas in Sinnar and Jazeera and Khartoum. And that is, again, we need to handle it with special care because we want people to return to safe places.
But what are they coming back to?
Well, of course.
Paint us a picture of what it looks like for someone who's been in Chad for years now, displaced, hasn't seen their home in, let's say, a place like Khartoum. What are they coming back to? What is the level of destruction?
Actually, those who are returning are not those who are in Chad, rather those who took refuge in Egypt, in other neighboring countries, like those who went to Uganda. Life for refugees is not that easy. And since now they can return to their own homes, they find their dignity in going back home, definitely. And they're rushing back. The only thing is we want to make sure that they are returning to safe places, places where there are no corpses, there are no unexploded ordnance that can create hazards for children. And we want to make sure that the public services are in place because the infrastructure has been completely destroyed. We want to make sure that potable water is there, that sewage is working, and there is electricity for people to come home. And these are now big headaches we are trying to fix. For the returnees, they may not find their homes. Well, most likely they need something to eat from the next day. And then for them to go to their farms, to start their business, they need to be supported to resume their normal life. So those are big headaches. And unfortunately, they are getting very little assistance from the world.
Do you have an idea of what it will cost to rebuild, to be able to provide those sorts of basic services for the people, to be able to rebuild their homes, basic, the institutions? Do you have a number yet? And how do you plan to fund this?
Well, actually, this needs specialized parties to do the assessment of the loss and damage as a result of the war. We asked the World Bank, the UN, as well as African Development Bank to send a mission, assessment mission. Usually missions wait for peace to come, then they come later on. So we are waiting for them to come to do a bankable assessment that we can then build on it and work on it as well.
In the areas that you've liberated, what are your priorities?
As I earlier said, we want to make sure that life is returning to normal, public services are there, people are returning to safe places, and then people can resume their normal life and go for production, because the only way out of all this mess is for people to start producing. Most of them are farmers. More than 75% of the Sudanese depend on farming. So we want to make sure that they have the agricultural inputs that will help them start producing, and in 3 or 4 months' time, they will depend on themselves completely. So for us, we would like to make sure that they have the public services, they have the inputs for their production.
There are so many players regionally and internationally that are vying for control. How do you make sure that you maintain control of these areas that you've recaptured?
Well, if we go a little bit back, for us, a tactic for counterintelligence, counterinsurgency, the previous regime resorted to hiring guns. And unfortunately, then those guns went out of control, and they became the RSF. So my advice is for all states is to be very careful about how you go for counterinsurgents, what tools you use, what tactics do you use, so that they should not backfire later on. That's very important. For an army completely supported by the population, it's not easy to defeat such an army. Luckily in Sudan now, the whole community have rallied behind the armed forces. And since you are relying on your own people, and they are the ones who are supporting the army, it will be very difficult, and the ground will be really hostile for the RSF to come back. So there is very little chance for them to be back in the liberated areas. They are going to lose the remaining parts of it.
How?
Well, either they choose to cease through the peace negotiations, or will be forced to leave, as they have been forced to leave the liberated areas. So choices are there for them.
Are you making advances, and are you getting enough support from the international community to recapture those areas that you haven't been able to yet?
We are not getting actually any international support to recapture the land. We are depending entirely on our people. And luckily, we are making big strides every day. And though the enemy has resorted, of course, with the support of external actors, to use the most advanced technology of drones to hit back on very sensitive civilian public services like electricity and hospitals. So that's creating problems, because you can hit from long distance. But definitely on the ground, they are losing ground every minute. So they will be driven out. And most of them are mercenaries from other countries. So I think when they are defeated, they have no choice but to go back to their countries.
There are many groups, non-state actors, that are fighting alongside the Sudanese army. And one of them is the Justice Equality Movement, which you are the leader of. You've said before that your plan is to eventually integrate those forces into the army. How does that look like in practice?
Well, in the beginning, there was a lot of mistrust. We signed the peace agreement in October 2020, and it has been almost 5 years now. Integration of antagonistic forces is not an easy job. There was a lot of mistrust. But luckily, as a result of peace agreement, now those forces that signed the Juba peace agreement are now fighting the side by side with the government. Armies, and now they came to know each other closely, and that helped the whole idea of integration. So actually, during the war, we are preparing for full integration of the forces that are fighting beside the national army, and by the end of the war, we are quite hopeful that we will have one army in the country.
Before we get into after the war, which at this moment in time seems like it's quite a while away, what does it look like when you're fighting alongside the army? Who's making the commands? How does that day-to-day look like between, for example, the JEM and the Sudanese army? What is that relationship like?
Well, the relationship is good. The command is always with the Sudanese army, but we usually have the second in command from the movements. Our tactics in war are a bit different from those of the conventional army, and actually our tactics are closer to those of RSF itself, and RSF was created in the beginning to face our tactics, so we know what they do, and it's much easier for us to face them than the army itself. So the army is making use of that, but of course the army got the air force, they got the drones, they got the intelligence, so that's helping us while we are in the field. So we are really making use of what they have and what we have together.
But there are also some other groups that have appeared since this conflict began, other than the JEM. How do you see them being integrated into the army after the war?
We created what we called joint forces. So we brought all these armed groups together to come and fight side by side with the national army, and we have a joint command for all the operations we are taking. So I don't see any problem in that. Everybody's on board now, and we need everyone.
But for the average Sudanese civilian who's incredibly concerned of what that's going to look like the day after, who's worried that these armed movements will be who the government will be battling next after the RSF, what are your reassurances?
I'm really confident that none of these groups is going to fight the government anymore. And we are all concerned about that, and that is why we are rushing. Of course, rushing is not a good word because you have to do it carefully. We are heading towards integrating these forces, retraining them as one force. And the good thing in Sudan is everybody understands that the country needs only a single army. And the experience of having more than an army taught us a very difficult lesson. So nobody wants to go back to that anymore, either on the armed group side or on the side of the government. So possibly we make use of the type of tactics used by the armed forces to create a new force under the command of the armed forces that can take care of the borders of the country, because it's a mobile force, and the army can make use of it. But definitely we are not going to have a second army in anywhere, and no point for worries about how that's going to come up.
One of the big questions now is Darfur. I know your forces are fighting there now. What next for Darfur?
Well, what next for Darfur is actually not next. Right now, the people of Darfur needs urgent humanitarian support. And the response of the international community is so weak up to the moment. And as I said, it's some sort of an ignored or neglected crisis. But we do think it is high time for the international community to pay a bit of attention to the humanitarian crisis in Darfur and in the Sudan as a whole. For us, we are facing, we have to make sure that people are returning. They have the means that helps them to return to their own communities. They have the means to resume their life. And the whole process of recovery, then reconstruction, needs a lot of work to be done. And that's part of what we are concerned with urgently. And we are looking for also international assistance in this. As I said earlier, first to have an objective assessment of the loss and damage, and then to finance the recovery and reconstruction. And these are very expensive. I can't now talk of figures because these are big billions, but I leave that for the international community, for neutral parties to say that this much is needed to rebuild the country.
You know, we've seen major cuts in US aid. How has that impacted Sudan?
Well, Sudan is not a big receiver of the US aid directly. But usually US aid somehow supports other UN agencies. And those agencies are important in helping people for resilience, for increasing their production, especially the small farm holders. We do think that is important. And some of these UN agencies are now then saying, okay, that they are revisiting their budgets, whether they can help the people. And in times of crisis, and any step backwards like the one with the US aid is not going to help, definitely. Yeah.
So what are the main things what's the main support that you need from the international community?
Right now, we need access to the people of Al-Fashir. For them to have food, to have medicine, to have water. So there's shortage of drinking water, shortage of food, and shortage of medicine. And then those who are injured, they need medical care, and that they are not getting it. So those are the most urgent things in the besieged areas in Darfur. Generally in Sudan, of course, we need the strong support for the returnees to be able to resume their normal life. And that needs a lot of support, starting from the cost of going back, transportation. Then from the next day, you need to feed yourself, and you may not find anything around. You may not find even cooking utensils in your place. You may not find the doors and windows in your home. So you need to find a hut or a tent to stay in till you can rebuild your house, and so on. Then you need the tools to go for farming, and you may not find them. So these are very difficult things. Besides as I said, the public services that people need: water, electricity, sewage, the health services. The children who return want to go to school from the next day. They may not find their schools, all that. And the teachers are not there. They left the places. They have to return. The doctors are not there. The medical staff has to come back. So these are a lot of difficult things.
So what does that look like for the average Sudanese civilian? When there are no doctors, no teachers, what is life like for them right now?
Life is a hell, as you can call it. But at the end, they have no choice. And the best place is always home. So they have to return, they have to find a way because living in some sort of refugee camp is not an easy thing, and it's not a dignifying one. So people want to go, even if their resources are meager, they prefer to be at home. And that's why they're rushing back.
That's actually one of the things that really surprised me when I was covering Sudan, is meeting those women in the tents. I went to Chad as well. And one of them told me, I told her, what are you worried about the most? And she said, my son, he was doing so well at school. He was top of his class. And now I'm worried if he's taking all this time out of school, how it's going to impact his future education. People had such a dignified life before they were uprooted from it and displaced. I wanted to ask you how you're funding the government's budget right now during the war, when taxes, foreign aid, and production are at their lowest levels.
Before going to the budget, actually, we have population who kept living in refugee camps now for over 20 years. And as you said, children have lost their future, actually, because they could go only up to 8 years of education. Then that's the end of the whole thing. And when they find no other alternative, they try to go and join the fighting forces. And that's, again, the nightmare. So I think the sooner people look for peace, the sooner people return to their homes, the sooner they resume their normal life, definitely we can have a better future for the children. That's one thing. As far as for the budget is concerned, well, having a war budget is not an easy thing. We lost almost over 80% of sources of revenue from the next day of the advent of the war. And we have to have a very stringent budget that puts zero for development, zero for any luxuries, and we concentrated on basic services to the population. We tried to pay part of the salary to the people who have been displaced, of course, whether they're in refugee and within the country or displaced abroad. We pay them part of the salary. We depend entirely on tax, on custom duties, a little bit of income from gold, and the government service in general. So the resources are limited, and also the services we are delivering are definitely limited.
Do you see yourself bringing things back to Khartoum, reopening schools, reopening hospitals, bringing back the state institutions to Khartoum?
Yes, we are looking to do that soon as we feel the services are back, because unless you have water running, unless you have electricity and the sewage working, you can hardly bring people back to Khartoum. And then you need to have an operational airport to make sure that internationals also come and join us. We have talked to different international agencies and multinational banks, and we think they will be somewhere there in the recovery process, and they need to be close to us. That means we have to have the airport working. We need to have them in a safe place, definitely, to make sure that they are not hit by drones, and then they will come. But you can't start recovery if you are staying away, so you have to come back, and that's what we are trying to do, and hopefully that will come very soon.
Thank you so much for your time, Your Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you indeed.